Hey, how's it going? Seth here from retipster.com. In this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about land surveys. So one of the inherent challenges when you're buying a piece of vacant land is the fact that it's vacant. Like when there's no house on the property or no clear markers to identify where the boundaries of the property are, and especially when there's no registered physical address. Like you can't just type the address into Google Maps or a GPS device and get to the property, because if that address doesn't exist, then there's no way for these systems to figure out where that property is located, which can be pretty problematic because if you want to go and look at it yourself, or if you want to build something on it, you obviously have to know where your land is and what it consists of. And a lot of times there are some really helpful GIS parcel mapping systems on the county website that you can use to give yourself a really good idea of this. But the fact of the matter is, those parcel maps are not the same thing as getting an actual survey on the property. And a survey is when a professional surveyor takes the legal description of the property, which is usually a really confusing string of words and numbers that doesn't make a lot of sense to the average person. They take that information, they take the title work on the property, so all the title history and all the documents relating to it, and they will go ahead and put together a drawing of the property. And they can even go out and put survey markers on the property to mark where the corners are. So if you or anybody else wants to go out and see on site where the actual boundaries of the property are, you can do that. And we've actually got a really good article on the blog if you want to check it out and look more into how legal descriptions work and how to make sense of them. I'm going to go ahead and link to that blog post beneath this video if you want to check that out. But essentially, if you're going to order a survey, you don't have to do all this stuff yourself. That's what you're paying the surveyor for. All you have to do is give them the legal description and any title work that you have relating to that property, and they will go ahead and use that and put together the drawing for you. So you don't have to concern yourself with all this. But the question that I want to address with you today is, first of all, when do you need to order a survey? Especially when you're buying a property for a few thousand or even a few $100s. Is it really worth spending several hundred more just to get a survey to find out where it is? Especially if you have a GIS parcel map from the county, can't you just rely on that? Why do you really need to go through the steps of getting a survey too? So we're going to cover some of that stuff. And then also, if you ever do decide to order a survey, what kind of survey do you need to get? Because there's actually several different kinds of surveys. And if you don't know specifically what kind of survey you want, then you're kind of just leaving it up to the surveyor to give you whatever they think you need. And a lot of times they don't necessarily understand what you need it for. And, it may be in their best interest to just, oops, let's order this person the most expensive survey we can possibly put together for them and charge you thousands for it. So another important aspect of this is you understanding what kind of survey you actually need and what sorts of information you need included on the final survey that they put together, and ultimately why you're ordering a survey in the first place. So in terms of when and why you might want to order a survey, there's a few different scenarios that come in mind, and this is definitely not covering every scenario. These are just the ones that I've encountered most frequently when the need for a survey arises. I'd say one of the more common reasons for a survey is when the person who's buying the property from me wants one. So they just want to feel comfortable and they want to see on site and in the form of a drawing where the property boundaries are and anything else that's important for them to know about, like easement access, or utility lines going through their property, or the topography of their property, or whether their property's in a flood zone, things like that. Different buyers will care about different things. So whenever somebody says that they want a survey, or maybe they're questioning where the boundaries are, or sometimes one of the neighbors might even come up to them and say, hey, I actually own this big chunk of your property, it's not yours. And then basically we need to prove them wrong by ordering a survey. That's one particular scenario in which a survey would be required, or at least very smart to get if you want to win that kind of a battle. And I can also tell you, if you have any plans to do anything to the property, whether you're building on it, or if you're going to subdivide it, or change the zoning, or repurpose it for any reason, in those cases, I think a survey is basically a must, because you want to be very, very clear about where the boundaries are before you just start altering the face of the earth. For instance, if your plan was to harvest timber, you definitely don't want to go into that just guessing where your property is and starting to cut down trees, because you could be cutting down trees from your neighbor if you're not absolutely sure where the boundary lines are. Or if you're going to parcel out the property and split it into smaller buildable lots that you can then sell and potentially make more from the property overall. Again, I'm not sure why you would ever buy a property with that intent without first doing a survey, because before you can start breaking it up into smaller parcels, you have to know what you're working with, like exactly how large the property is, where the boundaries are, what the dimensions are, all that stuff. So if you're looking at doing a more involved project like that, then I don't think there's even a question that you have to get a survey. And you're probably going to need that surveyor's help in the future as well if you do start breaking up the property and trying to sell it off as smaller lots. Another instance in which a survey can be helpful is if you have a property that is landlocked and you want to confirm or deny that there is any easement access to the property. So for example, if you own a property that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere and there are no clear roads going to and from the property, it's basically like stuck behind somebody else's property and you have to walk over that property in order to get to yours. A lot of times what will happen is there actually is something called an easement, which gives the owner legal access to walk over that other person's property without trespassing to access their property. And sometimes they can even put like a road through that easement, and they're allowed to because they don't necessarily own that portion of the neighbor's property, but they're allowed to cross over it in order to get to theirs. And sometimes when you see a landlocked property, these easements will exist somewhere in the recorded deed history. Sometimes the easements will not exist. It's literally landlocked and you can't get to it without trespassing over somebody else's property. So whether there is or isn't an easement, in order to figure that out, you basically have to do a title search and see if any easements show up in the recorded title history on that property. And if they do show up, you can take that paperwork, bring it to a surveyor and say, hey, I want you to draw a map of this property, show me where the boundaries are, and show me where the easement is that goes to my property. So where does it cross over which of my neighbor's properties? That might be another scenario where a survey would make a lot of sense. Now, the key is, though, surveys usually cost at least a few $100s, sometimes a lot more depending on the property in the area where your property is located and what the surveyor feels like charging you for the work. And if you bought a landlocked property, you probably paid a very, 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 very low price for it because of the fact that it was landlocked. Or if you didn't pay a really low price, you should have. So the thing about that situation is, if you know that there's an easement to that property, you just don't know where it is, then I would say yes, it probably is worth paying for a survey, because the existence of that easement, especially if you can pinpoint exactly where that's at to the person you're selling the property to in the future, or to yourself if you decide to use that, that's going to add a lot of value to that property simply because now you're able to get to it. But if there is not an easement, then I would say it's probably not worth ordering a survey, simply because that property is not going to be worth a lot no matter how you slice it. And paying a lot of money for a survey just to confirm the fact that, yep, there's no easement, there's no access, so it's not worth very much. It may not make a lot of sense. Now, with that being said, I think the textbook answer that you'll always get from a mortgage lender, from a surveyor, from an appraiser, from an attorney, any of these people, they're probably always going to tell you that you should always order a survey. That's kind of like the sage advice that you're going to hear out there. And admittedly, there is a lot to be gained from having a survey and just knowing for certain where that property's boundaries are located. And that's also a helpful thing when it comes time to sell the property. If you have that survey and you can just provide it to the person, that adds a lot of value and reassurance to them as well. So I don't think it's ever like a dumb thing to get a survey. I think just from an economical standpoint, you have to ask yourself, okay, how much do you have invested in this property? How much do you stand to sell it for? And is the cost of this survey going to be able to fit within that profit margin, or is it just going to be throwing money out the window? And that's not really something I can answer for you. That's something that you have to evaluate for yourself, depending on the numbers with the deal that you're looking at. So just keep that in mind. I'm not telling you that you should or should not order a survey in any particular situation. I'm just telling you how I think through this when I'm considering paying money for a survey on a piece of vacant land. Now, when it comes to the type of survey to order, I know I've heard different reports from people, and I've even experienced this myself when they call up a surveyor and they say, hey, I want a survey for this property. And the surveyor responds with, okay, that'll be $3,000. And it's like, whoa, $3,000? Like, why so much for this particular property? And sometimes it costs that much because it's a huge property and there's a lot of moving pieces and components that go into drawing up that survey. So the price is that high simply because like it's actually going to take a ton of work. But a lot of time, if you're hearing a huge number like that, it's probably because the surveyor is quoting a survey that you don't really need. So I want to just quickly explain to you some of the different survey types out there. And this is not an all-inclusive list. There's probably other survey types that I'm not going to mention here. But for all intents and purposes, these are like the major, most common ones that everybody in the survey business is familiar with. So I've just pulled up several different websites from surveyors around the country just to kind of show you the commonalities between them. And this right here is a surveyor that's located not far from me. For the most part, the cheapest kind of survey that you can get is something called a surveyor's report. I've also seen it called a mortgage inspection report. Looks like this other one here calls it a surveyor's real property report. And essentially what that is the surveyor is not even going out to the property. They're literally just like sitting at their desk and they're looking up the local records, maybe looking at the historical plat maps from back when the neighborhood was first established. And basically the idea behind this kind of report is to just give a lender or a property owner reasonable assurance that yes, this property does technically exist according to the historical records, and this is what we think it looks like based on the information we've seen, like very, very basic, without a whole lot of information. It's just going to show that yes, here's the property. It is this feet long by this feet wide on this road. There you go. Good luck. So there's not a whole lot of information or reassurance there. And because that kind of survey does not require a ton of work from the surveyor, it's by far the least expensive one. However, because there's nobody who's actually going to the property and staking out the corners, I think it's only marginally useful. I mean, in my mind, the whole reason why I'm getting a survey is to be 100% sure of where the property is. And it's also a benefit for my future buyers so that they can see where the stakes are and they can feel confident that yes, they are actually buying something that exists and this is literally where that property is. So every time I've ordered a survey, it's always been this next one on the list, which, some people call it a property boundary survey with location of improvements in this case, or another name for it would be just a boundary survey, which establishes the location of the property boundaries that are marked with permanent iron corner stakes set below the ground. So to explain what that means, in many, many areas around the country, maybe even everywhere for all I know, whenever they establish a new neighborhood and put together these plat maps to say, okay, here's lot 1, here's lot 2, here's lot 3, what they'll do is they will go to the corner of each one of those lots and then drive a huge piece of metal rebar into the ground so that in the future, if people want to go through and be 100% sure of where the corners are on each lot, they can actually use a metal detector if they want, or even dig down into the ground until they find this rebar and say, yes, this is the corner because here's the piece of rebar. So that's what they're talking about when they reference the permanent iron corner stakes set below the ground. They'll actually find where those are and then drive a wooden stake into the ground above that so you can very clearly see where the technical corners are of the property. Now, when you're dealing with a property that isn't just vacant land and it might have like a house or a barn or something like that on it, you can also get a boundary survey with improvements where they're not just going to show where the corners and where the lines of the property are, but they're also going to show the location of those improvements on the property as well. So there's that too. And then by far the most expensive and comprehensive type of survey that you can order is something called the Alta survey. This shows every possible thing you can imagine. So not just where the property boundaries are and not just where the improvements are, but like everything. And this is actually a list I found on one surveyor's website where you can check off every single possible item that comes with an Alta survey. And there's a lot. They'll tell you the exterior dimensions of all buildings at ground level and the measured height of all the buildings and substantial features observed in the process, striping, number, and type of parking spaces, whether the property overlaps with a flood zone at all, and the current zoning. I mean, you name it, they'll tell you in this kind of survey. And this is the kind of survey that you typically need if you're going to do like a massive commercial construction project, because there's a lot of information that the contractors and builders are going to need in order to build it adequately and not get in the way of any easements that might be running through the property. And also keep in mind, if you are going to be doing a very, very complex project like subdividing the property, then I think you're definitely going to want to talk to your surveyor about your specific plans and ask them what kind of survey they would suggest. There's definitely a time and a place for this kind of survey, but for the most part, if I'm just buying a small residential lot and I'm not doing anything to it, I'm not building anything on it, I'm not changing the zoning, I'm just going to take it as is and then flip it to somebody else and sell it for more. I honestly can't think of any scenario where I would need to pay thousands of dollars for all this information, because I just don't need it. Pretty much the most I would need is this kind of thing, the boundary survey, and or if there's any improvements on it, then possibly the boundary survey with improvements, or whatever the surveyor I'm working with uses to explain that kind of thing. So I'll show you a couple surveys I've ordered in the past that were boundary surveys, just to give you an idea for what I got when I ordered them. This one in particular was a parcel that consisted of 3 lots side by side. It was a pretty small property. And the reason I ordered this survey was because one of the neighbors was claiming that his property line came up to like right here, and he was like insisting that yes, this is my property, and I was insisting that no, it's not. So now I have to go order a survey and have the surveyor stake the property and prove to you that I actually own this. So that was why I ordered this particular survey, and I believe this one cost, I think it was less than $300. It wasn't crazy. This particular surveyor I've used for years, and he does a great job and charges a really fair price. So it really wasn't that expensive. And as you can see, it doesn't include a ton of information, but it includes everything that I needed to know in that situation to verify where the property was located. And I've also got the legal description up here and the drawing of the property and how many feet long and wide and what the dimensions were and where the road was in relation to it. And just to give you an idea, this is what the property looks like according to the county's GIS mapping system. That little orange square was the property. If I was just relying on that, that was all the information I had. And it actually was reasonably accurate. I mean, that's not like bad or wrong or anything. It just doesn't have as much information as this one does, which clearly shows which lots I owned and how wide they were and how many feet away it was to the next road. And also, this guy actually drove out to the property and drove wooden stakes into all 4 of the corners for me. So all in all, it was money well spent because it resolved the issue with the neighboring property owner. I wish they just hadn't done that in the first place, so I wouldn't have had to do this. But if that kind of thing does come up, that would be one potential situation where ordering a survey isn't just a nice thing to do, it's sort of a must so that you can prove where the property is that you own. So that's an example of just a very simple boundary survey on a vacant parcel of land. This is another example of a survey, and this one is a little bit more complex. This was a 12-acre parcel that I owned up in northern Michigan. And one of the interesting things about this property is that it was located right on Lake Huron, which is a federal body of water. And the way federal bodies of water work is that you don't actually own the beach. That's like public property that anybody can go and walk on. So one of the ideas behind this survey was to very clearly mark out where my property ended and where the beach began. And this kind of shows you a dotted line where that is. And this particular property also had some wetlands on it and was in a floodplain, and so they marked out where they thought the floodplain was based on the 100-year flood line established using aerial photography. So that was pretty helpful. And as a result of getting this survey and then also doing a subsequent perk test on the property to figure out where, if anywhere on the property, I could put a septic tank and drain field, I was able to figure out that really the only place on this property where a person could ever build anything was going to be in this corner of it, because that was the only place where all of the components needed to build a house existed. It was kind of a bummer because, you know, this is a 12-acre parcel of land, and if the house is back here, it's not going to have a great view of the water over on this end, which is kind of what everybody wants. But still, the fact that I can build a house at all on the property is pretty important to know, because if I can't, that kind of sabotages the value of the property and what a future buyer might be willing to pay for it. This particular survey cost me, I think it was about $750 because it was a pretty large property and there were a lot of moving pieces that they needed to include in here that they wouldn't normally have needed to include in a simpler scenario like this. But that just kind of gives you an idea of what the cost of this type of survey can typically be, at least in the areas where I've worked. And it's worth noting, I've found that some surveyors are a lot more expensive than others. I think you'll find that the smaller shops where the surveyor is just like one guy and maybe his assistant are going to be a lot less expensive than the big, huge companies that employ like 50 people. In my experience, that's pretty much always been the case. And I don't necessarily know that you're going to get like a better or worse quality of work from a smaller guy. They just have less overhead to cover, and as a result, they're a lot cheaper. So I just keep that in mind. If you're looking for the lowest price, try to find those survey shops out there that are just like a one-man shop, or maybe like a 1 or 2 or 3-man shop, because that will probably give you a better value and a bigger bang for your buck overall. So if you're in a situation where you just have to get a survey, I think it's definitely worth calling around to more than one surveyor just to get some quotes on how much they're going to charge, because you may find some pretty big fluctuations in the prices that some of them will charge. And again, my intent with this video is not to tell you that you should or shouldn't order a survey in any particular scenario, but it's more just to help you understand like how I think through it and the situations when I've ordered one, why I ordered one, and why it was worth it, and why I was willing to pay the price. I think every situation is different, and there's definitely a lot you can get done just by relying on things like Google Earth and the county's GIS mapping system, neither of which are guaranteed to be accurate ever. But in a lot of cases, they're accurate enough to get the job done and just to get you confident enough to move forward. So with that said, I hope this video was reasonably helpful for you. If you've never ordered a survey, it's not really hard. And for the most part, the surveyor does all the work for you. You just have to provide them with the basic details, usually the title work and the legal description, and then they will go to work and prepare it for you. So thanks for watching, and I wish you all the best.